Welcome to today's episode of the Bench to Boardroom podcast. I am your host, Cynthia Steele, and today's guest is a very dear friend of mine who I worked with for a few years. We both got our first jobs out of our postdocs at the same company in the same position. In fact, I interviewed her for her position, and her name is Dr. Alice Wyse-Jackson. Alice is originally from Ireland, and she did her undergraduate and her PhD work in Ireland, and then did her postdoc at the University of Washington in neuroscience, where she met her husband and built her family, and she still lives now working as a medical science liaison. And I really wanted to have Alice on because a lot of trainees are very interested in the MSL position. They don't necessarily know what it's all about, but they know it's something that they hear a lot about, and it sounds really intriguing. And so, as you'll hear from Alice and I, we both did that job. There's some really good parts to it, and there's some parts that you eventually start to tire of, let's say. So, without any further ado, my interview with Dr. Alice Wyse-Jackson. All right, here we go. That's okay. That's right. Dr. Alice Wyse-Jackson, welcome to the Bench to Boardroom podcast.
Hi, thanks, Cynthia.
Good to see you.
I know, this is great.
Yeah, we haven't talked to each other in a couple of years, right? Except for through text.
Yes. COVID and babies.
Yes, yeah. Babies will do that. So we will get to the babies, but I know you have a 4-month-old, and how old is Joyce?
Joyce, she is 2.5-ish.
Wow.
Now. There's 2 years between them, so 2 years to 4 months.
Okay, wow. My last guest, Jacqueline Duvall, also had them 2 years apart, and so they're like 3 and 1 now, and she said it's just chaos constantly. It's just always chaos. And I asked her, is she like the dog in the burning room, just going, "This is fine"? And she said,
yeah. See, I'm still trying to maintain the air of my house is still tidy all the time, and I still like cleanliness. So I'm trying to teach the toddler to be a mini me. I don't know how well it's working. She tries.
I think that's a more long-term experiment. You're gonna have to let us know how that one turns out.
Yeah, I've seen her with other kids, and she's pretty bossy, but by herself, anyway.
So she's already taking after her mother. I love it.
I don't know what that says.
She's a girl who knows what she wants. I appreciate that. So for our listeners who don't know you, please introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm going to do what I normally do when I'm giving a presentation to physicians and say I am Irish, which is the accent, and it saves people trying to figure out what's going on. I moved to Seattle 7 years ago. So after I completed my PhD in Ireland.
Okay.
So I moved for my postdoc. I guess, where do you want me to start?
Okay, let's start back in Ireland. So you obviously born and raised in Ireland, and you, I guess, talk about your education there and up to your PhD.
Sure. So I did my schooling in undergrad. I went to a college called Trinity College Dublin. For my undergraduate, I did a neuroscience degree. Actually, I don't know if you have European listeners, but the college system there is a little bit different. I went straight into a science degree, and then I specialized for my 3rd and 4th year in neuroscience. So all of my 4-year degree was all science-based, which makes you pretty specialized, which means that your PhD, as a result, is a little bit different. Okay. After graduating, Trinity's a good university, but it's very, very academic. And they say at the end of your year, everybody thinks they're basically no one thinks that they can get a job apart from if they have a master's or further research or do a PhD. Okay. So I remember coming out of my undergraduate being like, I'm unemployable, of course, which is absolutely ridiculous. But I thought that. So I was supposed to start a PhD. The funding fell through, and I ended up working as a waitress for 10 months.
Oh, bummer.
Maybe a little less.
The funding for your project or your scholarship or your stipend?
the stipend. So how it works in Ireland, UK, is that your supervisor has the money, and then they hire a person, has the money for a project. Generally, that's how it works. Has the money for a project, and then they hire someone to do that project. So I had been offered a project with my undergraduate supervisor, and he was a Novartis researcher. He was doing good research. I liked it, and he'd offered me a place. And I remember I was traveling for the summer, and I was going to come back and start my PhD, and it was great. And then I got this email while I was in Belize, of all places, being like, "Sorry, funding fell through. Good luck."
At that point, were you like, I'm just going to stay here in Belize and like teach surfing?
I was working with monkeys and manatees at the time. I was like volunteering, so it was pretty amazing. But I was like, I'm gonna just, let's have a few. I had a few beers that night, and I went traveling, and like I was like, well, I guess I'll just go home and figure it out. I'll get a job and apply for other jobs. It took a while to do it. Like I knew I wanted to do a PhD at that point, and unfortunately, PhDs generally start on the academic timeline. So I was coming home in November. There weren't any jobs. There weren't any PhDs to be had that I could see. So I applied for everything and anything. And when it rains, it pours. Finally, when it came about May, I finally started getting kind of callbacks, and someone offered me this place, my PhD position that I subsequently took. So he was great. It was a place, I went and moved down to Cork, which is in the southwest corner of Ireland. And it was a project that he had. It was a 3-year PhD. Again, very different to, you're looking at me.
Oh my God. Okay. I knew one woman in graduate school who got her PhD in 4 years, and she did it by basically sleeping in the residence quarters in like the burn unit. Like she worked constantly, and I think she still got done in like 4.5 or something. So yeah,
it's just different. Like I had some credits to take, but not a lot. I didn't really, in actual fact, I signed up to teach labs and to give demonstrations. And when my supervisor found out about it, he was really mad, because he was like, this is taking time away from your project, which is what you were being paid to do. I signed up because I got extra money for it. So great. I was not a PhD student, and I needed the money.
It's nice to know that they're broke in Ireland as well as in the US. Graduates are broke worldwide.
Yeah, I was on 18,000 for my PhD, and that was actually one of the higher end stipends. So funny. But I lived in a very cheap city. I think at one point I paid rent of like 300. So there were a lot of things going for me. You learn to budget. That's one thing the PhD does for you. So sorry, we're getting sidetracked. I moved to Cork, started this PhD. Yeah, it was 3-year PhD, and I had to be in and out. Like I had funding for 3 years. As I say, European academia is different. It was a lab. I was my supervisor's 27th PhD student, I believe, and he retired shortly after I finished. He had it dialed down. He knew exactly what he wanted and who he was looking for. He didn't care that I wasn't necessarily top of my class. I was just always for instance, when I was giving my resume to him, I did fine in my end of year exams, but I always came really well. I always did really, really well in my projects, for instance. Right. And he was like, that's what I care about. I want to know that you're good at projects and you can get through. And then you chat to someone and you can find out whether or not they're a good fit for your lab. So it was in Cork, which I didn't necessarily want to be, but it was a small city. I was going to be there for 3 years. I was there to get my PhD done, and I did it.
Wow.
So I moved down, and it was in ophthalmology, which I knew nothing about. Absolutely nothing about. And I just fell in love with it. It was looking for, I refer to ophthalmology as like lazy science, as a joke. But I liked it because I could look at the eye in isolation. I didn't have to worry about the rest of the body.
True.
You can just you do something to the body, but all you care about is what's happening in the eye. And it's a pretty protected organ. So if you inject something into the eyeball, it's quite unlikely to go up unless it's specific things. Obviously, there's caveats.
Yeah,
But you don't have to worry too much
no,
about
that's
it.
true. Isn't it true that the eye is the only place where you can see essentially into the brain without making any sort of incision? Because the retina is technically part of the diencephalon, I think, right? It's all from neural crest cells. So as I understand it, the
Oh,
retina and the optic nerve, sorry, we're going to get really geeky here. The optic nerve is technically myelinated by oligodendrocytes and
yeah.
is surrounded by the three meninges. So technically, yeah, if you look into the eye, you're sort of kind of looking into the brain.
Well, your photoreceptors are all
Oh yeah,
neurons,
they're all
so
neurons, all except for your Mueller cells are basically glia, but otherwise, yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
it's I liked it, and what I subsequently learned at conferences and such is that a lot of people who are working on the brain end up in ophthalmology as like a test subject. Like,
Sure.
does it work here? And then maybe we can go into the
Okay.
brain.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I did a 3-year PhD there. I think you can, my opinion is that there's 2 ways to do science in academia. Okay. You can do my PhD supervisor's way of publishing a lot in lower tier journals. And so, for example, I was first author on 5 papers throughout my PhD. And then like lower tier authors on a couple of other ones as well. Or you can work your ass off and get maybe first author on a big name journal, which realistically, if you're going for a Nobel Prize, I know which way we should go. I'm not that smart. Okay. So, and
which do you think is more beneficial? Which do you think is more beneficial, having lots of papers by the time you're done, or having like a Nature paper?
That's a good question. Probably if you're going, it depends what your end game is. Academia, the Nature paper, but how many people are going to get a Nature paper out of their PhD? Very few.
Sure.
So I know what I would rather have, rather than going for even the impact factors of 8, 9, 10, for instance. And one of those, I had 5 at 3 to 6.
Sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at science. Yeah. For me, it made my job hunt pretty easy. Yeah. I knew that I was very employable because I had a track record of being published. Absolutely. It also made my transition to my postdoc lab incredibly difficult.
Oh dear. Okay.
Because my postdoc supervisor did not work the way that my PhD supervisor did.
So let's, for a second, and before we move on to your postdoc, I do want to ask you, because I ask all of my guests this question. While you were busting your butt over the course of 3 years in Cork on your PhD, when you had those days that you were just going to drop it all and throw it all away, what were you going to go off and do? What was your dream job?
I have thought about this question so much since I heard you ask it to other guests. I don't know if I had one.
Okay.
I really don't know. Like, I always wanted to go off traveling, and I think I had like this alternate life of being a woman about town, living in New York City, and like being a business exec and wearing cute little heels and mini skirts or whatever. But it never, it was just a different life. It wasn't the career path that I'd chosen. I did a science degree.
Yeah.
And I'd worked as a waitress, and I knew, God, I didn't want to do that again. So I don't know.
This might be interesting though, because if you think about it, you told us that your time in university was all very science based, and so by the time you get to grad school, like you're pretty committed at that point. Whereas in American PhD system, you do your 4 years, and a lot of that time is taken up by general credits. For some reason you still have to take another English class, and you have to take a social science and a foreign language. At least I did in my school. I went to a Lutheran school, so we needed 8 credits of religion courses, including like religion 101, so there was a whole lot of like extra padding that went in there. And so by the time I got to grad school, we have the 2 years of like just taking again your fundamentals, like your biochemistry, your physiology, immunology, things like that. And then by the time you get to your comprehensive exam, that seems like that's when your PhD actually starts, because that's kind of when our PhD technically starts. Once you pass your comprehensive exam, now you're a PhD candidate. But leading up to that time has just been so much fluff and so much.
And how long does it take you to take your comprehensive exam? Like how many years are you a PhD student before you do that?
So you do 2 years, and then you take your comps at the end of 2 years. And yeah, that's how it goes, And my niece actually passed her comps just a couple of months ago, and we had a big a big celebration over text, because that's a huge hurdle. Once you pass your comps, then you're officially a PhD candidate, and that's kind of when like the clock starts, so to speak, on your PhD
Wow.
time. So leading up to all that time, you have all this fluff and you have all this time to think about kind of the things that you want to do. So I feel like maybe you bypassed all of that.
Yeah, I think I did, which is probably where you get the thought of I'm going to give this all up, because you've been at it for 4 or 5 years and you're not getting paid. Yep. And you're in there every day and things don't work. Yep. And you need, whereas I had an end in sight the whole time. I was constantly being told, like my supervisor had a paper a year. He wanted everyone to have at least 2 papers, if not 3 by the end of their PhD. And that was going to be your 3 chapters for your dissertation. And then boom.
Okay. So you did not have time to daydream.
No.
Okay.
But that's how it worked as well. So I liked it. I didn't want to be in the lab if I wasn't doing something.
So while that's going on, are you feeling at that time that you definitely wanted to go into industry, or did you enjoy that?
Not at all.
Really? Okay.
No, because I loved it so much, and it was successful. Obviously things didn't work. Of course things don't work and you pivot. But because I liked it so much, I thought I was going academic the whole hog. I was like, this is what I want. I'm going to create my own lab. I'm going to find all these new medications. I'm going to do disease research. And I'm going to go as a European researcher. You should work in the States if you're going to go into academia. Which is, you absolutely should. The science going on in the States and in American universities is world class. It's amazing. And that's why I moved. I was lucky I had a green card. I could basically move anywhere in the States. So I didn't have to get a PhD that could also have a non-resident person. So I was in a really nice position. But I thought I was going to academics. So I went and applied for postdocs. And at this point, this is where you start making those decisions. And this is where the dichotomy between the European and the US system really played out into my career path. My supervisor knew that I wanted to do academia, and he was supportive of it. He actually generally directed people towards industry. Yeah, I know that's quite different to what a lot of people I've heard. But he knew I wanted to do academia. My track record was decent, and I loved the eye. So I was going to apply for ophthalmology postdocs, and he, with the best of intentions, said, no, don't do that, because as soon as you go into a postdoc in ophthalmology, that means you're only ever going to get grants in ophthalmology. And in Europe, that's a limited pool of resources. In the US, there's a lot of money in ophthalmology. In Europe, there isn't. And at that time, I didn't know that my life was going to be in the US. So I took note of that it seemed like good advice to me. And in Europe, you do multiple postdocs. So you get training in a lot of different labs. In the US, you go into your postdoc, and that's kind of where your career takes you, right? So I applied for postdocs in areas that I didn't really, it was my lack of knowledge that I applied for postdocs in areas that I didn't necessarily care that much about.
Okay.
So it was a mistake, right? But you live and you learn.
Yeah.
And I'm subsequently grateful for that mistake, because it made my transition out of academia much quicker.
Sure. Oh dear.
Right.
Okay.
So I moved. Yeah, I applied for postdocs. Want me to continue on with the story? Okay, so what was happening was I was coming towards the end of my PhD. I was starting to write up. I was finishing up a few bits and pieces, um, and I went to a conference in Seattle. And in ophthalmology, in ophthalmology research, the biggest conference of the year is a conference called ARVO. And that year it was in Seattle. And I just really wanted to go. Seattle, to someone living in West Coast Ireland, is like a metropolitan hub. I loved it. I really wanted to go. So I got some funding to go, and I flew there by myself. I presented my PhD research. No one else from my lab was there, so I just had the week to myself in this glorious city. The sun was shining. It was like 75, 80 every day. I was out having cocktails by myself. I was people watching. I was seeing all the different neighborhoods. No one needed me to do anything.
Yeah.
I was there by myself. I could enjoy the lectures and then go and do things by myself afterwards. And I just fell in love with the city. So while I was there, I did actually fly down to San Francisco for a postdoc interview in UCSF.
Okay.
And this lab, I think that those papers are subsequently being published in Nature. I can't even remember what they were doing now, but they were doing something really cool with mitochondria.
Yeah.
And I got offered that position, actually. But I remember flying home being like, God, I really liked Seattle, though. Like, didn't love San Francisco. I had a friend who heard the postdoc salary, and she said, you're going to have a hard time living in San Francisco on that salary.
A little bit.
Which is funny, given Seattle's just as, well, not quite as expensive, but pretty expensive as well.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And she told me this. So I started thinking, and I started looking at postdocs in Seattle, and I found this one that was kind of a fit for me. It had glia, and I worked on glia in the eye. So I applied. I flew back to Seattle for that, for the interview. And then the rest is kind of history. I basically told that supervisor, hey, I have a position that is going to go to somebody else. You need to offer me this job, or otherwise I'm going to go down to San Francisco. I could do that because I knew I had a strong CV. The lab was not necessarily a good fit for me, but at the time I didn't care. I wanted to be in Seattle. And I thought this is what you did. You just got a couple of different postdocs. I was like, I can transition if I need to. So then I moved to Seattle. I took that job, moved to Seattle, started a postdoc in an area of research that it's interesting to talk about for a little bit, but it wasn't my passion.
I remember the few years, every time that ARVO was in Seattle, the weather was glorious. The sun was out, like you're saying, it was sunny. It was like in the 70s. I mean, it was phenomenal. And as two people who have both lived in the Pacific Northwest, at least for a time, that is not...
Everybody's willing to move. Everybody wants to move to Seattle when it's like that.
And it's not indicative. You do not see Mount Rainier all the time. Unlike what you might believe based on your 5 days there when it was gloriously sunny.
Yeah.
And you're in Portland, you do not see Mount Hood all the time. It's a miracle.
No, but I like seasons. I'm Irish. I have no problem with cold, rain. I like seasons like that, and then I enjoy the summers.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Well, the summers in the Pacific Northwest are unsurpassed. They're glorious.
Yeah.
The hiking, the food, the green. Oh my gosh. I miss it. I truly miss it every day. It was so expensive. And
there's something so magical about them because you have them for this short snippet of time and you need to make the most of them. And everybody wants to meet up in the evenings to have wine in the back garden and go hiking at the weekends because everyone then goes into hibernation for the winter.
Yes. Although, again, when we lived there, my husband did get a little tired of just constant drizzle and wiping muddy dog paws and everything else. It was just got to be a little too much. So
that's
why we live in Florida now, where we have the opposite problem.
So then, no, I don't mind it. Yeah.
So you're in your postdoc, and it was a neuroscience postdoc, or what were you researching there?
Yeah, I was looking at manipulation of the brain and how it affects diabetes and obesity management. As I say, it's a really interesting topic for discuss for 10
Sure.
minutes. Unfortunately, the models that we have and where we are in terms of the science it makes it really difficult to study that question. So a lot of my time was spent on troubleshooting methods, on checking out new mouse models. And what I learned was it made me realize how much I didn't know. So I came out of my PhD unbelievably cocky and like, I can get a job anywhere. And then I realized rapidly, yeah, exactly. Rapidly realized that you are not the smartest person in this room. And wow, you haven't thought this through. And when
The same thing happened to me, Alice. The same thing. No,
really, okay, that makes
no,
me feel
it did.
better.
The same thing happened to me because when I did my defense, like my parents were there, my sister was there, and like one or two of my friends, like completely outside of grad school. And then like people came and I gave this amazing presentation that I rehearsed like dozens of times and brand new suit and brand new heels. And I was totally feeling it, you know, and I gave this great presentation. And then afterwards, I felt like, yes,
I can take
me,
on the
you
world.
know,
Mhm.
behold, you know, and but then I went into the closed defense where I was just me and my committee, and they shot that down so fast, just
Oh,
boom, right back down to earth. You know, I still remember my mentor asked me the last question he asked me was to draw my PhD was did involve statin drugs, so it did involve the cholesterol biosynthetic pathway, and so he did ask me to draw the structure of mevalonate, which is the first step after HMG and HMG CoA reductase. No, sorry, HMG CoA reductase is the enzyme. Acetylacetyl CoA and it's something. This is going to bother me now, but anyway, the two components come together to form HMG CoA and then form mevalonate, and that's when the cholesterol biosynthetic pathway gets kicked off. And he asked me, draw mevalonate. And I got up to the board and I'm trying to draw it, and he just would go, nope. And I erase it, do it again, nope. I erase it again, nope, sit down. I I was deflated. And the worst part was after I left the room so they could deliberate, at one point I heard them laughing. And all I could think of was like, they can't, right? They can't fail me. Can I mean, how would they
well, they
explain
can
it
get
to everybody? They can't fail me, you know? Like I just gave this like incredible presentation. They can't fail me now, you know? And oh my God, I was having a full-blown panic attack. And then they called me back in the room, and I did notice that they were passing around a form and they were signing, and then someone finally turned to me and said, "Congratulations." And
Congratulations, Dr.
I
Steele.
was so deflated at the end of that day. Oh my God. And then we had a party afterwards, and everyone had champagne, and they were like, "Yay, congratulations." And I was like, I was like not into it at that point. I was so tired. So I hear you. I hear you. I think everyone has those moments where you just go from being like, I know my stuff, I'm good at what I do, let me at it, I
Yeah.
can help you. And then just, wow.
I lived in a
Yeah.
bubble where it was a complete bubble, and I came rapidly back down to earth, and that's a good
Yeah.
thing. It needed to
So is this
happen.
what you
I
meant
was
when you
this
said that your PhD mentor had a very different approach than your postdoc mentor?
Yes, my postdoc mentor, like our lab meetings, I'm not kidding, could go on for 6 hours. And
Was there at least food?
not always.
Oh,
No, not actually rarely. Like,
oh,
it was just different, and that's not how I work. It wasn't a great
yeah.
fit. He's a great scientist. He's an excellent
Mhm.
scientist doing a very, very difficult
Okay,
job. It wasn't a great
I
fit
see.
for us. And what happened was when I finally got given my first
Mhm.
grant. When you spend your postdoc, you spend your time applying for grants and writing research proposals. And again, I was writing research proposals on a topic that I was not passionate about at
Yeah.
all, and that obviously came across. I also just didn't know what I was writing about. It was really difficult. It was difficult science. Yes. So anyway, someone said, "Hey, I think she can do this. Let's give her some money to do her own research." And when everyone else was more excited about it than I was like, "This, I've got to get out."
That's a moment.
And at that point, I was just ready to be done with earning so little money and working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. And look, you can spend a lot of time talking about the pros and cons of academia. Sure. For me, it wasn't where I wanted to stay.
All right. So then how did you, where did you go to hunt for jobs, and how did you find ultimately where we met, which was your first job outside academia?
Yeah, we did. And I have such fond memories of meeting you in that interview and you being so excited about my PhD and us geeking out about eyeballs. Yeah, so I think I did the standard. I didn't really know many people who'd done industry in the US. Well, actually, very few. So, because I'd moved from a real pharmaceutical hub where most people who had PhDs were being employed on lines or various manufacturing or whatever it was. And for me, I didn't want to go back into a bench scientist position. So I think I was just done after those 2 years of my postdoc. I didn't want to do it anymore. So I started researching on, I think it was just Google, PhD, what do I do? And the MSL position, Medical Science Liaison, kept coming up time and time again. And it was one of these like, so you're a scientist who likes to talk to people and you like the research and you can explain it in layman's terms. And it just seemed interesting. I love traveling. It was a high travel job. Clearly, I like talking.
We both do.
We both do. And I like having conversations. I'm a people person. So this seemed like a good fit for me. And it paid a hell of a lot better than a postdoc did.
When I got my quote for my MSL salary, I think I actually wept because it was just, wait, I'm sorry, you think I'm worth how much? Because you spend so much time in academia feeling like so small, and you're fighting so hard and you're working so hard. And, when someone finally says like, well, this is what we think your expertise is worth, it just really strikes you in a very different way. So
Cynthia, I had that realization and you were there, the very first drinks reception I went to with BNL, and it was a BNL hosted executive reception. We were inviting our doctors along. And sorry, I used BNL. I worked for a company called Bausch Lomb. That's how I met Cynthia.
I actually interviewed Alice.
And yes,
because
it was a great interview.
Well, yeah, it really was, obviously.
It pretty much went along these lines, right?
This is kind of how it went.
Yeah.
I think I was shocked.
I came out being like, I think I got that job.
I think I was shocked when the 30 minutes were up, and I was like, no, we're not done talking. So that's when you know it's a good interview.
So I had this experience of going into a Bausch Lomb hosted executive reception and being handed a glass of wine, and all these people, all my colleagues, kept coming up to me being like, Alice, you're the new hire. We're so excited that you're here. And I had been flown in, and I had been put up in this gorgeous hotel, and I got a taxi to the airport. I just couldn't put into words how special that all made me feel. And I don't know if that's necessarily a reflection on obviously it's a good reflection on the company. It was great that the company did that, but actually it's a really poor reflection on academia and how I was made to feel like I needed to fight for my position there every single day, which I think you put it in a different podcast as postdocs are cheap labor.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Like, why are we made to feel that way when you're working your butt off day in, day out to progress both the labs route and your own career? And so I looked for MSL positions.
No,
is the conclusion of what happened.
But no, I mean, I think I've covered this also in my podcast with Sarah. But when you transition out, it is kind of amazing when you start. And I completely agree. It's a sign of a good company. I think the team that we were part of at Bausch Lomb was really, really wonderful, and the salespeople that we worked with and the marketing people we worked with were just all phenomenal. But it's different when you go into a job and you you hand in a deliverable and they say, wow, this is great. Thank you so much. Or you provide some insights and they say, oh, wow, I never thought about that before, and you
Mhm.
start getting this positive feedback. And this is where I won't necessarily use the word ego as a bad thing, but this is where your ego starts to build up a little bit. And that's a good thing because I think in academia, we're so trained to, be the good worker bee, and
Yeah.
try not to make yourself too famous, try not to make yourself too visible, and in a lot of ways, you're not supposed to want some of these things. Like you're saying, you go to a reception at a beautiful hotel and someone hands you a glass of wine and they want to talk about science. I mean, like, that's not supposed to be part of your experience, but it can be. And when it does
Hmm.
happen, you're just it just is this feeling like, wow, I knew there was something better out here, and I knew I wasn't crazy for thinking that. So I love how you said
And
that.
well, what gets me is we had all these. Obviously, everyone's trying to keep people in academia, and I understand that we need
We
academic
really do.
scientists. I have a good friend who is now a professor in Harvard. She is a killer scientist, and she is made for this. But she works unbelievably hard, and she is made to research those questions. And we need people like her and many others. I just wasn't made for
Yeah,
it. Um,
and that's okay.
and that is okay. I wish they made those. I wish they made it easier to stay though. So when in Seattle, and I was with the University of Washington, we'd have all these talks about why to stay in academia, and a lot of it was like the flexibility, and I can create my own questions. And I think in academia, in industry, you can do that to a sense, to a point as well. Obviously, you have a job to do, but you can mold your own career path and how you want to do a job, and everybody does a job slightly differently. Like every MSL, for instance, does a job completely differently, and it's fine so long as you get the job done.
Absolutely. And you and I worked with some real characters who did things very
Yeah,
differently from how we did them.
yeah. You and I worked very
We did.
similarly,
We
so
did. So
yeah.
let's back up and talk about the medical science liaison job, because that is something that a lot of students hear about. It sounds phenomenal because you, like you say, you travel, you meet people, you talk about mechanism of action of drugs, and you get paid really well to do that. So
Right.
why? So I guess, like, let me ask you, okay, like, what has been your experience in the MSL position, and what did you really like, and what did you come to not like so much? Like, what's fantastic about the position?
It is a job for, I think we've discussed it before, ambitious people and lazy
Yes,
people.
my husband says that exactly. Yes, it is.
So ambitious. What I loved is you learn the whole medical affairs organization. You learn clinical. You learn, or not even medical, just medical affairs. You learn the whole organization, as pharma as a whole. You learn to work with sales, marketing, R&D, clinical, managed care. It depends on your job. It depends on your company that you work for. Um, as to the responsibilities that you have and the drug that you're working for. I work in rare disease these days, so I do a very different job to one that I did at Bausch Lomb. Um, but I loved that aspect of it. So you're working with a lot of different people types and a lot of different, you're pulled into a lot of different things at any one time. So you're not just learning an aspect of science and then repeating it time again to various doctors. There's a lot more to it, which I
Mhm.
liked. Um, the travel initially was great. It can wear
Yeah.
on you. As we discussed, I now have two young ones at home. So for me, being on the road that much is not as feasible anymore. So at BNL, I had 13 states. I was traveling 3 nights a week, at least every
Mhm.
week. Um, and I just can't do that anymore. It's not
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
I like being home. I like seeing my
Yeah.
family.
That's good. You still like your children. That's good.
Right. Apparently, I wanted them bath time. Who
Yep.
knows?
Yes.
So, and it depends on there are some people, lifetime MSLs, who like doing it and they like learning a new disease state and like learning a new drug every time. I'm not going to be one of those. I'll be put it out there, but it does have if you wanted to go that route, it has a lot of flexibility and you can create a schedule and do the job how you want to do. So for some people, it's an excellent lifetime job.
Mhm.
The disadvantage I see to the MSL job is it's a hard transition out of the MSL role. Especially if you take multiple MSL jobs. Okay. People suddenly see you as a medical scientist, and they don't want you outside of that because you don't have the nuts and bolts of all the other things that you're working with. So you might work with clinical development, for instance, but you don't know the day in, day outs of that job. It's not impossible. By no means is it impossible to get a job outside of the MSL role, but it is a harder route.
I think for me, it was learning that if you want to advance within the MSL role or you want to advance within medical affairs in general, I mean, what our manager at the time told me during my performance review was, well, eventually you become, senior MSL and then maybe like an executive MSL or a medical director like you are now. And maybe eventually you lead your own team. And I remember thinking at the time, like, that seems a little limiting. I'm not sure if that's where I want to go. But I want to go back to what you and my husband say all the time, which is this is a great job for ambitious people and for lazy people because, as you said, you could make your schedule, you can go visit your doctors and do your spiel and have nice dinners and stay away from home and that's you can make perfectly good money doing that. Or you can do what you and I have done, which is meet as many people as possible, make as many connections as possible, talk to people about the research, learn about new disease states, learn about new drugs, and then use that as a springboard into something else. And I'll be perfectly honest, the last 2 jobs that I've had have come as a result of connections that I made through my time at Bausch Lomb.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful.
It's not easy.
No, it's
but
not
it
easy.
Is absolutely possible. But then again, if you're making the transition from academia to MSL, that's a really tough transition.
Big time.
And maybe we should discuss that because there's so many people I get reached out to all the time about people in academia, postdocs who are like, I want to be an MSL. How do I do it? And there's no easy answer, but I spoke to maybe 10 different people who were MSLs at the time, just trying to get information on it. And it frustrated me when I was talking to recruiters and they were like, well, nobody's going to hire you as an MSL. Maybe you should go do something different first, like a medical writer or whatever, which is nonsense. They just want, of course you can do an MSL position. It might be harder to get. And you have to have a company who's willing to take a chance on someone who doesn't have experience. But both you and I did it. We went straight.
We both did,
So for anyone doing that transition, don't give up. You can do it. Don't sell yourself short either. It might take a while. It took me 8 months maybe to land my role of like really solid job hunting. But I also, I don't know if you did this differently, Cynthia. I applied for anything and everything, which I shouldn't have done. It was a waste of my time. Like I applied for cardiovascular MSLs. I know nothing about the heart. Why on earth was I doing that? No one would have hired me.
I didn't do it that way. I actually made a connection at Bausch Lomb before I applied for the position. And so that's how I learned about the product that we were going to be discussing the mechanism of. And then from there, he put me in touch with some people who are now mutual friends of ours. And that's how I ended up getting the position. So for me, it came about because of an initial connection. But certainly I've known a lot of people who have done what you say. They just blanket the field, and this most recent interview that I did with Jacqueline Duvall, one of the things that she said was, look, if you think you might be a good fit for a position, just go for it. I mean, the only thing that you're wasting is a little bit of time, a little bit of your own time to revise your resume or revise your cover letter or whatever, shift some things around. But if that doesn't bother you, then, I mean, try it,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would still encourage people, if you think that this is something you might want to do, I would say, shoot out an application and see what happens. But don't apply for things that you wouldn't like. Like, I could never be a cardiovascular MSL. I would not have nearly the expertise to do anything related to oncology. It might be interesting.
Well, I guess I hadn't realized like an MSL role it's a big expense to a
Sure.
company. They put a lot of trust in us. You are handed a company card, a company credit card, and told go visit people and talk about our product. Right.
And here are the rules that you need to follow. So it's not a blank check that you get. There are rules that you need to
follow. No. There's absolutely huge rules, but they're putting trust that you're going to do that, and you're not going to get they're not going to get sued as a result of your actions. Absolutely. Right. So there's a huge amount of trust that goes into that. And so if you have to have, coming from industry, you have to have either disease area expertise. Yep. So for instance, Bausch Lomb hired me because I had a PhD in the retina. So it worked, right? I knew the eyeball. It's okay. I could discuss eyes. So I could go into an office and say, yes, I have a doctorate in ophthalmology, and they would listen to me. Or you have to have MSL experience. And then, so you don't have to learn how to do the job. You just learn how to learn the disease state. You can't learn both things. Then no one's going to hire you if you don't have both, one or the other. But I didn't realize that at the time. So I wasted a lot of time and energy.
Yeah. So then, for me, I think a good MSL has exactly what you were just describing. This is a person who has social skills, a person who understands body language, a person who can speak about the science down in the weeds at like the very molecular level. If you want to talk phosphorylation events, sure, we can do that. Or I can talk to you, Mr. or, really Dr. Small Town who, sees everybody in like 100-mile radius who just wants to know if it's affordable. So you could talk to all those people about how this drug or this device is worth their effort and worth trying to get for their patients. And I think the other thing that both you and I had that really rings through to people is enthusiasm about what you're discussing. If you're genuinely excited about the science and what went into the creation of this new pharmaceutical product or this new device, I think it'll show. And that to me is something that you really pick up on, because doctors, you've probably noticed this too, Alice, doctors can smell BS from a mile away. They can. And some of my doctors, that I became really good friends with, would quiz their sales reps on things that maybe weren't necessarily something that they always talked about, because they wanted to make sure that the person they were talking to was legit. And nothing makes you seem more legit than handing a business card over and saying, I have a PhD in the retina. I have a PhD in trabecular meshwork cells. Then people kind of stop and say, ooh. So when you go back to trust, they need to trust your clients, your doctors, your optometrists, your ophthalmologists, whoever you're talking to need to trust that you know your stuff and you know what you're talking about, because otherwise you can't talk deep science to somebody who, maybe doesn't have the same kind of deep research background that you and I had. So I think candidates for a good MSL would be someone who doesn't mind traveling and being away from home, someone who enjoys talking to people, who can explain things well, who enjoys being face to face or occasionally virtually with people. But what else do you think makes for a good MSL?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. Also, the ability to, I think the main one, and you actually mentioned it, is the main one for me is to be able to tailor to your audience. Yes. Sometimes you have 3 minutes. Sometimes you have an hour. Sometimes someone wants to hear every single nitty gritty and every single little bit of conference paper and publication that came out and be up to date all the time. Sometimes they just don't care. They want to talk about side effects. And actually, occasionally, it's just, if you're maintaining a relationship, say like it's not just a business call at that point, and you've done the business aspect of it, and then you're just having dinner and you want to have a chat. Sometimes they just need to know that you're a nice person. True. And like you can continue, that they can trust you and they can tell you things. And that, so when they call you up for an answer, you're going to give them the correct answer, and that they can trust your judgment on things and know that you're the person to call to make the connections. So one of the most important things I think I bring to my role is making sure my physicians know that if they call me, I will do everything in my power to make sure it gets done in as quick a time frame as possible.
I agree.
And I think that's a good reflection on the company as well. So I now work for a company where we have that reputation of anytime our physicians, I work on a rare disease, our physicians all say, oh, that company is amazing, for they will get the job done. And sorry, I work for, maybe I should rephrase that. I used to work for Horizon. We were acquired by Amgen recently. But anytime you talk to a physician, they're like, oh, the Horizon individuals, yeah, they're perfect. Leave it with them. They'll help me. They'll help me out.
Wow. And that puts a little extra impetus on you, right? Like, well, I better live up to those standards. That's pretty lofty.
I know. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't work as hard. I shouldn't have worked as hard on some accounts because now they expect it of me the whole time. But I know for every physician who contacts me, it's another patient that gets on therapy. Like realistically, it helps get a patient on therapy who may not have gotten on therapy otherwise. So that's why for me, I really like working on a rare disease because it makes such a change to their life to get on therapy.
Can I ask what is the rare disease that you work on?
Oh, sorry. I work on a disease called thyroid eye disease.
Okay.
So it used to be called Graves' orbitopathy or Graves' ophthalmopathy. It a lot of people have heard of Graves' disease, but one of the manifestations of Graves' disease is that the fat and muscle behind your eye expands and grows, and this causes the eyeballs to be pushed out. So there's a kind of bulged look to your eyes, and which you used to have to go through surgery, which is a really invasive surgery. You'd cut into the skull to take out the fat muscle, right?
Nice.
And the outcomes weren't great. You might have to do that multiple times. Then you might have to have lid surgery or strabismus surgery to realign the eyeballs. It was a nightmare.
Wow.
These poor patients. I met one woman who'd had 70 odd surgeries on her eyes. Yeah, and she's now legally blind as a result. My drug is an infused medication that basically shrinks the fat and muscle back there and brings the eye back into the head. It's amazing. I love it. I love working on it. Yeah.
Okay, so I see. I just want to point out that exactly what you just did, I could tell that you loved it because I could tell just from looking at you and from hearing your voice, I could hear that you empathize with these patients. You could feel how difficult that must be and how painful that must be. And so now you're providing information about an intervention that's probably very costly and could be challenging to get depending on whether you're on Medicare or you have different insurance providers, but you are there to provide the justification of why it's worth that doctor's time, why that patient deserves to have that treatment, no matter how many hurdles they have to go through. And it's nice to know that someone like you is there to provide the mechanism of action, to provide the literature, to provide any sort of other scientific backup that's necessary to help that doctor acquire that medication. And so, yeah, I'm feeling it. I love that.
But they call it change champions, something like that. Yeah, we're patient champions. I'm not. I don't work with patients, but we have patients who, we have advocates who advocate for the patients. Yeah.
So wow, so that's awesome. And then and so as you mentioned, you don't travel as much right now. You're trying not to travel as much right now because you have two small children.
I'll step that back a little bit. I do travel, but I changed role to a smaller territory.
Okay.
So now I have 6 states, so I can do a lot of day trips. So a lot of my days look like getting on an 8 a.m. flight to Portland and then back on a 4 o'clock, running to various meetings so I can get back in time. It's just how I manage my territory. It doesn't have to be that way. You certainly don't have to do that. I will often get on a late night flight, so I stay the night, get an early morning meeting, and then I come back.
But I ask because a lot of the misconceptions that some people have about, or at least some women have about careers and industry is they feel like they won't have any personal time or any downtime, or there's this convention of, I'll never be able to have it all. I either have to choose a career or a family. I won't be able to have both. Or they may not be able to have a career that's on an upward trajectory like yours is, and also have, have kids at home. And so I love meeting people who have managed to do that, because I think it's really inspiring to people to see that it can be done.
It's
Oh,
hard, and
okay.
I don't know that anybody has it all.
True.
Like they're like, I'm not at home full time. I'm missing the day to day. Like, to be honest, I don't want to be at home full
Yeah.
time. I don't. I I don't want to do childcare full time. I don't think that is a. I think it's nonsense that they think that's the place of a woman. Like,
Hmm.
that someone would think that's the place of a woman. I feel very, very strongly that women should get back into the
Hmm.
workforce, in order to not exponentiate the gender divide of women leaving the workforce to have kids. It just.
Yeah.
Um, did you ever read the Sheryl Sandberg
I did
autobiography?
not read Lean In. No.
Lean in, thank you. I read. I know it's troublesome in some ways, and she's a little bit troublesome, but there was a talk on this about, like, whether or not women should leave the workforce, or whoever it is, to leave the workforce to pay for, so that they can look after their kids, so they don't have to pay for daycare.
Hmm.
And but they're putting themselves 5 years behind in terms of the career
Yeah.
trajectory, for instance, which is huge, and it means you can never catch that up.
True.
Yes, I think the dichotomy in the across the world, actually, it's not just a US thing.
Mhm.
In Europe, women get great maternity leave, but it's maternity leave, it's not family leave.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so maybe it should be split 6 months men, 6 months women. Like, have eh.
Hmm.
I'm getting off of my soapbox here,
No,
so
no, I
I
think this is
won't.
important. Another thing that someone asked me recently was, in terms of like the gender divide, because certainly academia is very male dominated. And, I feel like in industry, depending on the department, I mean, I feel like that at least that divide is not as obvious, at least
Yeah.
where I work and where I have worked. There's almost an equal amount of men and women who do these different positions. And
Hmm.
I think that's so important, because I like how you said that you feel that women should get back to work, so as to not perpetuate the stereotype of, she had her kids, now she's going to stay home. And
Yeah, like, don't get me wrong. Like, if you
no,
want to stay
of
at home,
course,
absolutely, that's
no one's
great.
saying that's
I'm
wrong.
fully in support,
And
right?
that is what, probably you were just home for 4 months on maternity leave. That's a more than a full-time job, right?
Yeah, it's it's hard work.
And no one's ever saying
And
that.
yeah, when I came back to work, I spoke to some of my colleagues, and I was like, God, this is so nice. I remembered how much I love doing this
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
Um,
And someone told me once, like they actually like going back to work because, they can speak to adults, and they can, you know, go take a shower, put their makeup on, get dressed, go out and feel like themselves again. That doesn't make you any
mhm.
less of a mom, or any less of, a spouse or a caring individual. It just means that, this is just another hat that you wanted to put back on. And if you don't want to put that hat back on, that's obviously that's your prerogative. That's perfectly fine. But I'm thinking that most of the people who are listening are the ones who will want to go back to work, and they might just be a little concerned about whether or not, that's something that's feasible. And overall, I'm hearing
So
it's feasible, but yes, it is hard. And you need to have a very
it's
understanding
hard.
partner.
Yeah. One of my friends told me recently that she thinks my husband is a saint. And I was like, Okay, well, I do a lot
Well,
too,
don't tell him
so,
that. His ego will blow up.
just, I think she's like, I just think it's so hard being at home alone with your kids. I'm like, yes, but they're your kids and they're his
Yeah.
kids, and we both can equally parent them. Um, I will say this is number two for me. So I have a lot less mom guilt about going back to work. Number one, I felt it was hard for me to get out of that feeling of, oh my gosh, should I be at home being a parent to this person that I brought into the world? And um, I didn't read a lot of books, but it's called Crib Sheets, I believe. Emily something or another. And she is an economist who put together all of this data on, like, how kids should be brought up and how, like, the outcomes. It's great. I read that, and she said something about the fact that there was some paper done. I didn't read my own papers. I just read her summaries. It was great. Some paper about the outcomes of kids who are raised by their parents or by like a daycare or a nanny in the house, a well-educated in childcare development nanny in the house, and there was no difference in the
Oh,
outcomes so long as the person looking after them was fully engaged and looking after their developmental
fair.
needs. So it didn't, that kid doesn't need a parent, they just need someone who is invested in them. And I think personally, I'm a better parent for being able to go out and live my own life and do my job, and then come home and be a parent
Yeah.
for a shortened period of time
Yeah.
rather than being a parent for 24 hours a day.
I think that's really telling because I remember meeting a woman once who said that, she felt like even though her job was incredibly difficult, and it required her to work all kinds of hours and, early mornings, late nights, and she was a doctor, so, following up with patients and writing up your notes at the end of the day, etc. But when she got home, she was so energized. And yes, she was tired, but she was more present for the people in her
Mm.
life because she had this time to flex those muscles, so to speak, and, use that part of her brain, which meant that by the time she got home, she was ready. She was ready to use that
Yeah,
other part of her brain or use those other muscles.
I look forward to daycare pickup. I look forward to the routine
Yeah.
being initiated. We call it initiate the
Okay.
routine when we get home, which is essentially you have 10 minutes of play, then we start dinner time, bath time,
Yeah.
bedtime. And it's the same routine every day, but we know it. She knows
Hmm.
it. He will know it when he gets older. Um, and it's fun for everybody, and kids thrive in routine.
Okay. Hmm.
So I guess that's us trying to have it all. But of course,
There's downsides to
there's
everything.
aspects of it that we don't have because we work.
I can't remember the name of the comedian right now, but it's going to bother me. But I saw a clip of her doing stand up and she said something. It was essentially exactly this about having it all. And she said, "You don't want to have it all." And the joke was, have you ever met anyone who's left an all you can eat buffet saying, "I feel good about my decisions"?
I think I've
It's
seen that
Michelle
one.
Wolf. That's what it is. Michelle Wolf. And I loved that. I absolutely loved that because, I mean, obviously it's really funny, but I mean, but it brings up a really good point. Like, I did absolutely everything I could and I pushed myself to the limit and I made myself so uncomfortable. And man, that was good, So no, it's perfectly fine to leave some potential things off the table and know what your limits are. And it's also perfectly fine.
It's fine.
But I wanted to
You
ask
just
you
have to make.
about that as someone who's recently postpartum. I wanted to ask about coming back to work after having kids. Because again, I think that's just a consideration for, young women who are thinking about transitioning to a career in industry and just making sure that they have the right support system in place to make that happen if that's something that they
Yeah.
want to do.
And I didn't grow up like that. My mother worked part
Hmm.
time so that she could be there when we came in, and that for me was probably the hardest decision, knowing that I'm not going to be there when my kids get in from school every
Yeah.
day, for
Hmm.
instance. Um, but because I'm having a career, there'll be other aspects to it that they'll be able to see and hopefully be proud
Of
of.
course.
And also, from a working perspective, if you're earning the money, you can pay people to do things. So, and hopefully pay good people to do good things
True.
for you. I saw a conversation. It was one of these women conferences, and it was an executive talking, and she said, "I pay people these days so that I have more time." And if you are when you get to a position where if you can pay people to clean your house or pay to have your groceries delivered or something, just to get time back so that you can focus on things that you really want. And that, for me, it was a huge shift when I moved to industry. Suddenly I could afford these things, so I could pay to have my time back.
Absolutely.
As a postdoc, I certainly couldn't. Um,
Absolutely. In fact, my friend Julie Tutzloff, who runs her own CRO with her husband, she says something very similar. They stick to their routine, and she is willing to pay for certain conveniences because it allows her more time to spend with her kids and with her spouse, and doing the things like you say, doing the things that she genuinely loves to do. And so that's just a side benefit of you know working in an industry where you are paid what you're worth, and that's
And
helpful.
it's annoying because you know you can do these
Yeah,
things.
no,
You
that's true.
absolutely, and you know it's a waste of money. Um, like I should be able to clean my house every week, but
Please, I don't. I don't even have kids, and I don't. I don't have that. I don't have nearly your excuse.
my cleaner is my favorite person in the world. What can I
Yeah, right.
say? So, and it was adjustment learning that actually we have to pay for these conveniences.
Yes,
But
yes.
yeah,
So, is there anything else that you want our listeners to know, or any other advice that you would want to give a young neuroscience major who's thinking about?
who wants to be an MSL? I can give.
Oh, yes.
You know what's funny? I have when I was talking to people trying to become an MSL, and I was learning how to people did interviews, a woman gave me what I thought was the best advice in the
Okay.
world, and
We'll
she
listen.
said, "Everybody listen, and then don't do this."
Okay.
So what she told me was, she was like, sometimes they don't want to talk to you about science; they just want to talk about their dog. And so you just have to learn, like you'll chat about their dog for a bit, and then you say, okay, but next time we're going to cover XYZ. And I thought this was so insightful and like brilliant as an MSL. Like, of course, it's all about making the people connection. And so the next interview I had, it was with it wasn't the hiring manager, it was before I got there, it was just a recruiter. And I gave this as an example, and she said, of like, how would you do the role? And she said, and I said, oh, well, actually, like, I think it's all about the people connection, and maybe they just want to talk about their dog.
Mm-hmm.
And then next time you'll get to the science. Well, obviously, I did not get a call back because that's absolute nonsense. A company is hiring you to do a job. They are not hiring you to talk to a physician about their pets. They want to get to the point, and obviously, on a day to day, that might be what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But in an interview, you want to give the perfect answer of you go in, you pinpoint what their need is, you immediately get there, and then you delve deeper into what are other aspects you could be helpful with.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's a
So
good.
don't do that.
I think that's a good approach to MSLing, because the point being, if so, let me give a better example, because even though I will talk about my dogs all day, any day, show me pictures of your dogs, I'll show you pictures of my dogs. I mean, we'll have a great conversation. But I think there's some knowledge there to be gleaned, because if you know that you have a doctor who maybe is between patients and they're running like 2 hours behind, and they're like, Alice, you've got 30 seconds. What do you need from me? I think it's perfectly fine to say, you know what? Maybe I'll catch you next time and we'll do coffee. I think that's perfectly acceptable, because what you're showing them is you are respectful of their time. You're not trying to push yourself in front of somebody. And this is what Sarah Sarkey and I talked about with regards to body language. If they are just not into it right now, they're literally being dragged from one place to another. Sometimes the best thing that you can do to show that you respect them as a person, you can say, you know what? Let's do this next time. It's okay. And then you go on and visit some other people who have more time for you. And I think that's perfectly fine.
And then also, hopefully, they're respectful of your
Oh, yeah.
time, and they won't schedule you again when they're
In the middle of
running
everything. Yeah.
crazy.
No, it's true. And if a doctor's not respectful of your
Because
time,
your time is valuable as well. You're taking time away from your family. You've got other places you could be.
yeah,
And learning that, I think as you get more seasoned as an MSL, you realize that actually you don't have to put up with some of the things that you think you have to put up
that's
with.
true.
And if someone consistently does that to you, don't go back to
Yeah.
them. You don't need them. That's fine.
It's like any relationship. You can tell if they're just not that into you. It's true, right? If they keep blowing you off, that's a pretty good sign that they're just not that into you, and it's time to move on. Maybe they get knocked down a notch or two on your list, and that's fine too. There's other people who are lovely and interested in research and more than happy to talk to you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no point in flogging a dead horse when you can make impact in other ways with different people.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Alice Wyse-Jackson, thank you so much for joining us today and letting us reminisce a little bit about the good old days at Bausch Lomb. It was so much fun to see you.
I think everybody says they have the good old days, don't they? It was nice. It was a good team.
It was. And, I was just at the Academy of Ophthalmology, and I did see some of the old crew. And, oh, yeah, a lot of hugs, a lot of, oh, we missed you. It's so good to see you. And, yeah, it was a really good time. So thank you for joining me today, and it was good to see you. Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you again to Dr. Alice Wyse-Jackson for joining me today and for sharing some of those insights. And thank you all for listening.